They say the Apostle Paul himself said the Bible isn't real, that Abraham and his wife Sarah and Hagar were just an allegory. His two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, just a metaphor. They say none of these biblical stories are true, that they're all just made up. And they use Galatians 4 as their proof text, believing that this single moment in Scripture unravels the entire Bible. But what if I told you Galatians 4? It's actually the moment everything comes together. Because Paul wasn't dismantling history. He was revealing how history becomes prophecy. And to get this, you have to understand one Hebrew word, Mashal. Galatians chapter 4, verse 24 reads, which things are an allegory. The Greek word there is alēgoreō, a word that appears only once in the entire Bible. And yet some have used this one word to argue that Paul believed the Old Testament was symbolic fiction. But let's slow down, because Paul wasn't discrediting the story of Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah, or Ishmael and Isaac. He was actually deepening it. In classical Greek, alēgoreō didn't mean to make up a story. It meant to speak in syllables drawn from real things. It was never about abandoning the history. It was about layering meaning into it. And that's exactly what Paul does with Sarah and Hagar. He doesn't rewrite Genesis. He rereads it through a rabbinic lens. That's the Hebrew word used for parables, proverbs like Solomon's Proverbs, and illustrative wisdom. It's not fiction, it's functionally true, both event and in meaning. And Sarah and Hagar are the perfect Mashal. Hagar, the Egyptian slave, she represents the old covenant, Mount Sinai. She gives birth to Ishmael through human effort and bondage. But watch this. Sarah, the free woman, represents the new covenant, the heavenly Jerusalem. She gives birth to Isaac through divine promise. Two women, two covenants, two births, one by flesh, one by the Spirit. All of it real and all of it revelatory. Paul doesn't say they weren't real. He says what happened to them meant more than what's seen on the surface. And that's the essence of Mashal, not just what it says, but what it shows us. We first see Mashal in Genesis chapter 1, verse 18, where the sun and moon are set to rule, Mashal, over the day and night. But not to dominate, not to enslave, it's the sun and the moon, but to govern by insight, to mark time, seasons, and signs. We see it again in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. Unto the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule, Mashal, over thee. But this was never about Adam dominating Eve, ruling over her. It's a consequence. The Hebrew doesn't carry the authoritarian overtone we often read into this verse. Mashal means to govern with perceptiveness, to see what others don't see, which means Adam saw something that Eve didn't. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 14 makes a startling claim. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Most people will use this to pin all the blame on Eve, but that's not what the text is doing. It's inviting us to ask a question. If Adam wasn't deceived, then why did he eat? He wasn't tricked. He wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing, which means he chose to eat it. And if he chose, then what he saw must have driven him to make that choice. So we have to revisit Genesis 3, verse 6 and 7 through Adam's eyes. And when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. But then verse 7 says, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Wait, then their eyes were opened? This forces us to ask another question. If Adam was with her and saw everything that was happening, what changed? What if the phrase, she gave also to her husband with her, doesn't mean at the tree she gave to her husband, but that after she ate, she then brought it to her husband. And when Adam saw her in her changed state, still standing, not dead, awakened to something new, he perceived something. Not rebellion, not disobedience, something deeper, something broken, something now missing between them. And then he chose to eat and enter into the same brokenness, but not out of ignorance, out of clarity. Genesis 3:16 says, he shall Mashal over you. We see that as rule. We often read this as domination, but the Hebrew Mashal means to govern with insight. She looked at the tree as one to make her wise. That's interesting, because Mashal is to rule by discernment, not by force. Adam, he Mashaled. He understood. He saw something Eve didn't. Remember this. All of this is happening before Adam ate the fruit, which just might mean his act wasn't rebellion either. It was solidarity, love, a descent with her rather than a life without her. And that right there should sound familiar, because in Romans chapter 5, verse 14, it tells us that Adam is a figure of him who was to come. Watch this. Just as the first Adam, made in the image of God and in the likeness of God, entered into death, not deceived, but choosing solidarity with his bride. So the second Adam, Christ, would enter death deliberately to redeem her. Adam was the pattern. Christ was the fulfillment. Adam didn't eat to justify her actions, but to reveal what God's love looks like in human form, which set a divine pattern that will be fulfilled by Christ and Christ alone, where love would once again choose death, not out of deception, but out of redemption. I go even further into this in my book, God's Garden. So when Paul uses Sarah and Hagar as a mashal, He's stepping into a long tradition of layered prophetic interpretation. He's not undermining the text. He's actually honoring it. Peter lets us know this in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 and 16, where he tells us, our beloved brother Paul wrote some things hard to be understood, which are unlearned and unstable rest, distort, as they also do the other scriptures unto their own destruction. So Paul was hard to understand because he wasn't surface level. He was swimming in the deep end of Hebraic theology, what would later be codified in 4 levels of PaRDeS: Fashat, literal meaning; Remez, hinted meaning; Darash, interpretive meaning; and Sod, secret or hidden meaning. Paul, in this instance, is using Darash, drawing meaning out of the text. But this method was foreign to his readers. It was foreign to the Greek mind. So Paul doesn't call this Darash because Mashal was more than a method. It was a model, a type, a shadow, a comparison. Mashal isn't just exegesis. It's symbolic insight rooted in truth. So in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 6, we read, to understand a proverb, Mashal, and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. Mashal reveals dark sayings, not dark as in evil. Hidden truths is what it's talking about. That's what the Apostle Paul does with Sarah and Hagar. If we're going to follow Paul's logic, we can't read the Bible like a rule book or a timeline. We have to read it like a mashal, a wisdom text that uses real events to unveil spiritual truths. Paul doesn't toss out the history. He preaches prophecy through that history. Sarah and Hagar weren't just 2 women in a household feud battling with each other. They were carriers of covenants. Abraham didn't just have 2 sons. He had a decision between flesh and promise, between what man can do and what only God can do. Mashal is how we know that the Bible is not shallow. It's layered. It's prophetic. It's spiritually alive. From Genesis to Revelation, Mashal is the thread. Not a fable, not a myth, but a multi-dimensional telling of the truth that governs, not forces, our vision. If this turned a light on for you, if something clicked that you've never seen before, then don't stop here. Grab my book, God's Garden. It's not just a read, it's a training for the eyes. It'll teach you how to see what the scriptures have been showing us all along. And if you're hungry to unlock this kind of depth for yourself, join my 2-night Hebrew course, The Ancient Hebrew Key. This isn't just a language, it's a legacy layered in every single letter. And while you're here, watch this next video so we can go even deeper. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it.